Republicans who call themselves never CR Republicans, they would never vote for a stopgap spending deal. But he wanted to attach their proof of citizenship election integrity bill, and that didn't convince enough of them. And so 14 Republicans voted against it, and it failed on the floor. And so right now we're kind of looking to see what the next step is. Speaker Johnson, for the last 2 weeks, really has said, there's no plan B. He hasn't told anyone in his inner circles privately what he wants to do. President Trump's calling for a shutdown if they don't have that election integrity bill, and the Senate might just have to move forward with something on its own.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by congressional reporter Cami Mondeaux. Cami, where do we stand with possible government shutdown? I mean, House Speaker Mike Johnson had a plan for how he's going to fund the government, always dealing with sort of intransigent members of his conference.
So what we saw is Congress took its first step toward wanting to pass some sort of government spending deal, and what came as a surprise to absolutely nobody on the Hill, not even Speaker Johnson, is that it failed. He knew when he brought it to the floor that but enough Republicans were going to oppose it that it had no viability on the floor.
Enough people to break a majority.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so he had tried, putting together a CR that would last until next year, but he wanted to have a little incentive to those Republicans who call themselves never CR Republicans. They would never vote for a stopgap spending deal. But he wanted to attach their proof of citizenship election integrity bill, and that didn't convince enough of them. And so 14 Republicans voted against it, and it failed on the floor. And so right now we're kind of looking to see what the next step is. Speaker Johnson, for the last 2 weeks, really has said, there's no plan B. He hasn't told anyone in his inner circles privately what he wants to do. President Trump's calling for a shutdown if they don't have that election integrity bill, and the Senate might just have to move forward with something on its own.
Right, and there's been a split. As you mentioned, President Trump, he wants the election integrity bill, thinks it helps him, win the election. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, not a fan of this strategy, thinks it will actually cost Republicans the election if there's, or at least hurt them in the election if there's a government shutdown. So there seems to be a little bit of tension there.
Right. There are a lot of vulnerable Republicans in the House who I've talked to who say a shutdown is not an option. Not only would it keep them in D.C. off of the campaign trail, it also kind of makes the argument to voters that Republicans can't hold the majority because they can't govern. And so vulnerable Republicans, they see like the only way out is a temporary CR. It has to be a clean one, or else the Senate's not going to be on board. The White House won't be on board. So it seems like everyone's pretty much on the same page of what's going to happen. It's just a winding path until we get there.
So one faction that has tended to make trouble for various House speakers, the House Freedom Caucus, has had a leadership change. Walk us through that.
Right, so their current leader, or I guess now not the leader anymore, Bob Good, he was just elected in January. But as most people know, Bob Good lost his primary earlier this summer after getting into a bit of a tussle with Donald Trump. He endorsed DeSantis before DeSantis dropped out.
Right.
Trump endorsed his challenger. So Bob Good will no longer be in Congress come next year. And so the Freedom Caucus basically got together for a private meeting to vote on a new leader. At first it was kind of like a battle of the Andys. They had Andy Biggs versus Andy Harris. Andy Biggs dropped out a few hours before the election, and so now Andy Harris is the de facto new leader. I've heard that it's only until January when a new Congress comes in, so they'll probably have another election once some Freedom Caucus members leave and maybe some new ones join as they get elected, but we'll see how that pans out.
Don't want to have the same name as a Democratic president potentially, right?
Yeah, that would be kind of weird for headlines, so just have Harris.
Harris on Harris. So there has been a push by Nebraska Republicans to make a change to how they vote for president. What's the change and why has this become an issue?
Right, so Nebraska, how they allocate their electoral college votes is different than most other states. So they have 5 electoral votes. 2 of them go to the statewide winner, and then they have 3 congressional districts where whichever candidate wins that district gets the electoral college vote. And so one of their districts, the 2nd district, it's kind of like a blue dot in this otherwise red state. And so it has given Democrats an out in some cases. So in 2020, Joe Biden won that. In 2008, Obama won it. So it kind of gives Democrats a chance to steal one vote. So now this district is really coming into play because depending on how you look at the whole map for November, there are some circumstances where it could end in a 269 tie. So this one district could be what gives a candidate the 270 votes needed to win. And so it's really coming into play where Democrats and Republicans both want it.
Sure.
So now all the Republicans in Nebraska are saying, let's go to a winner-takes-all system so that they can salvage that one vote.
And the only other state that allocates electoral votes this way is Maine.
Correct.
And Maine is a state that former President Trump has never won statewide, but he does keep winning that second congressional district there.
Correct. And yeah, and so it's held by a Republican also. And so Trump's been advocating for going back to a winner-takes-all. Lindsey Graham has also gone to the state to travel to advocate for a winner-takes-all system. You haven't seen that same push in Maine because, again, like you said, Trump doesn't really have much of a hold there. But
Sure.
Nebraska, it is a red state, so they're really pushing to try and get that.
As Nebraska goes, there goes the nation.
Yeah,
Thank you, Cami.
of course.
You can read Cami and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.